All right, here we go. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. This is the Antibiotic Reduction Expert Series. I'm your host, Ryan Hines. I'm the Communications Manager at Biomin. This is the 11th episode in our series. I want to thank you all for joining today. Our topic is stabilizing liver function for optimal cow health and performance. I'm joined today by two featured experts from Biomin, Ignacio Otavia and Andrea Urbanella of Biomin. Let's start with Ignacio. Hello.
Hello, my name is Ignacio Artavia. I come from Costa Rica, but I'm based in Austria. I am a product manager for Mycotoxins for Microfix, specialized in ruminants. I have worked a little bit in the Netherlands and in France, a little bit all over around Europe, with grazing dairy farms, also a little bit on nitrogen efficiency, and general topics on dairy nutrition. And it's been a year that I'm working with Biomin, and it's a pleasure to be here presenting and meeting you all through this webinar. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Ignacio. It's great that you could join us today. We also have another Biomin colleague, a technical expert in the field, Andrea Urbanella. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm talking to you from Italy right now. And I joined Biomin 3 years ago as technical sales manager. And in this position, I am supporting my colleagues in sales mainly in the Western European countries. So that's it.
Absolutely. So providing technical service and advice as well as part of that to customers in the field. We have plenty of live listeners who happen to be out in the field. So we thank those of you who have tuned in for our live session. As we proceed, I just wanted to point out that this is an interactive session. So that means two things in particular, that anytime during today's session, you can go ahead and ask a question to either Ignacio or Andrea, or both if you care to. Just type that in using the webinar chat function, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can, either during the remarks or specifically at the end when we get to a dedicated question and answer time. It also means that when it's interactive, we're going to be able to get your input on a couple of topics. We've organized a couple of audience poll questions where we're going to ask you also to participate and share your views. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with Ignacio, who's going to bring us into this topic, give us some context about how liver function relates to cow health and performance, how all of this ties into reducing antibiotics on the farm, and some of the key considerations that are necessary to make that work. Ignacio?
Thank you, Ryan, for your introduction. It's a pleasure again to be talking about cows with you. First of all, let's go again through the title of today. We're talking about stabilizing liver function for optimal cow health and performance. We're going to be focusing first about the importance of the liver, just some generalities about its relevance, then the major risks or factors for the liver, and then how the mycotoxins play a role in being one of these risk factors. Also, another kind of toxins that can also harm the liver. And then we're going to focus on tips on how to use a good fuel filter, from the analogy that the liver is the engine of the cow. And then lastly, how to implement Microfix in practical use in your dairy farm or the dairy farms that you work with. So first of all, the importance of the liver. As many of you may know, the liver has a lot of physiological functions. It's responsible for the gluconeogenesis, for example, which is the process for generating glucose out of fatty acids, or especially propionate, which is such an important route of metabolization in cows. Also very important ketogenesis, so the utilization of the lipid deposits in the cow, and then to make this available as energy source in periods of energy limitation through the diet. Also the protein turnover, the production of different proteins that will go to different parts of the body, the urea synthesis, and many other very important functions, without leaving aside the detoxification. So how to filter or deal with these toxins that are coming from the diet, and to make it clear in the rest of the body, or where these toxins would reach to other tissues. So we're gonna, as we said, we're gonna talk about the liver as if it would be the engine of the cow. And why is this? Well, because it's only 1 to 2% of the total body mass, but actually it uses a quarter of the total body energy. So actually, for us to have an idea, in order for a cow to produce 30 kilograms of milk production, which is not a high yielding cow, she's already requiring 2.5 kilograms of glucose, and all of this glucose is mostly being produced in the liver. So in order for the liver to produce these amounts of glucose, it requires a blood flow of 40 to 50 tons of blood per day. Sounds a little bit crazy, but it's real. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the major liver risks, and actually the principal one is negative energy balance. And we're all the people in the dairy business, we all may be aware of this issue, but it's important to always go through it, because it's the most important way in which we can protect the liver of the cow. So the negative energy balance is a very common period in which the cow, it's a situation in which the cow undergoes during the period of after giving birth to the calf. And when the cow is peaking on the production, it's performing more and more in production, and is growing. However, the dry matter intake is not paired with this growth in production. So then the cow loses weight because she's using fat reserves in order to provide energy enough for this growing milk output. So we can see that negative energy balance marked in the red image. So let's talk about how this fat is sent to the liver. First, the fat is kept in the reserves as adipose tissue, and this was built up during the close-up period or during the dry period. So the cow could store some extra energy as adipose tissue, and then during a moment of negative energy balance, there is a hormonal reaction that causes that this adipose tissue is sent to the blood in form of nifas, and then these nifas are coming to the liver, where they should be transformed into ketones and energy. So this is the emergency or the metabolic pathway in which the cow can generate this energy. The problem is that she ends up also producing ketones, and also the extra or excessive fat is being stored in the liver, and this comes with many problems. But the important message to take home is that the level of production of ketones, or the level of production or the level of storage of fat in the liver, is dependent on how overconditioned this cow was. So the most important key message here is that we must avoid to overcondition the cows, so to have them on higher than 3 body condition score, because we want to avoid this extra or excessive storage of fat, because it reduces liver functionality. And I'm going to explain what a reduced liver functionality implies. So some effects in the animal, first of all, is that these high concentrations of ketones and nifas in blood, it reduces the physiological function of the organs, specifically the liver. So all the functions that we were talking about, like gluconeogenesis and production of hormones and synthesis of proteins, all these functions are reduced. Additionally, the glucose uptake is reduced. So that means that the glucose that might be in solution in the blood cannot come inside the cell because of a lack of insulin or a lack of insulin receptivity. And a reduced intake of glucose leads to a reduced production because the lactose is what drives the production in the cow. Then the immune response is reduced, so this leads to higher incidence of infections, many different infections that we will later talk about. Also a decreased toxin clearance capacity, so that means that the endotoxins or the mycotoxins that may have come through the feed are going to be reaching more directly to the tissues where they will cause damage. And then a decreased production of hormones, which has an impact also in delayed initiation of ovarian function, which means that also the reproduction of the cow is highly compromised. And this we want to summarize into what in the end matters in the farm. This has a high economical impact, which is not only short term but also longer term. It includes higher veterinary costs because the interventions that are needed, opened calving intervals, decreased milk production, and decreased cow lifetime.
Okay, thanks Ignacio for this first introduction. Now I'm going to give you some insight on how other factors affect the liver health.
Absolutely. And as we go into that, we're turning the topic to mycotoxins. And Andrea, just for those of our listeners who might not be familiar, real briefly, what are mycotoxins?
These are secondary metabolites from fungi, which have toxic properties. So they can affect the animal in several ways. And in a few minutes, I will show you what is the particular case of liver.
Okay. And before we get into that, let's turn to our audience who may already be very familiar with mycotoxins, and let's see what kind of measures you're already taking, at least to monitor mycotoxin contamination of the feedstuffs. Right. So for our live audience, please go ahead and choose the one best answer that fits your situation. Do you currently test for mycotoxins? Yes, I test TMR or main raw materials regularly. Yes, but only in case of problems. No, I usually have no possibility to test, or no, I don't really think it's of help or a cost-effective solution. Go ahead and take a moment to choose the one best answer that fits your situation of these four. As soon as we get enough votes in, we're going to go ahead and close the polling and then go back to Andrea for a comment. I will read out the results. So we're going to see essentially in real time where everyone here who's listening stands on this topic and whether that matches with what we see out in the field. We already have more than half of the participants in. I'm going to leave it open for a little while longer. And it looks like the voting activity is in there with over 60% of our audience having weighed in. I'm going to go ahead and read off those results for everyone, especially for Andrea, who might not have this in front of his screen. Do you test for mycotoxins? We have 34% who say, yes, I test TMR or main raw materials regularly. We have 49% who say yes, but only in case of problems. 13% who say no, usually I don't have the possibility to do so. And a mere 4% who say no, I don't really think it's of any help. So we really see that, half of that are saying yes. If something is off in my operation, they're going to go ahead and test. 34%, which is also a great number to see that they are also testing regularly. Andrea, how does that match with what you see with customers when you're out in the field?
Yes, I think this picture is quite representative of what I see. Normally, there are some difficulties in do a regular testing, which includes sampling or availability of a facility, lab facility, and also the cost. This is another problem that somebody can have, especially small farmers in testing regularly for different raw materials. So in our presentation, we will see also some tips on how to overcome these difficulties. So I was previously referring to how mycotoxin affect the liver. So since we are experts in this field, I want to give you some insight in this topic. So the proof comes from a recent paper which has been published in Journal Dairy Science really a few weeks ago by the University of Piacenza in Italy in cooperation with our R&D. And in here we have basically we have 12 high lactating cows, high producing cows, which were exposed to 3 different diets. You can see the diets here. This is the control diet, the diet with higher concentration of mycotoxins, and then a third group where also Microfix was fed. So this, you can see that the diet was contaminated with Fusarium mycotoxins. These are fairly low level of contamination. The concentration is expressed as on dry matter basis on total ration. So we have in the control diet 0.3 ppm of DON and 0.1 ppm of monosin. The diet with more mycotoxin has double the amount of DON, more or less, and 1 ppm of fumonisin. And the third diet is slightly more contaminated than the second, but also Microfix is added to the diet. So basically the study with the 12 cow divided the cows in 3 different groups of 4 cows, and after a feeding period of 21 days and a washout of 14, so each group of 4 cows switched the diet, so that at the end of the study all 12 cows got all the diets. Want to point out also that the source of contamination was corn, naturally contaminated, and that this concentration of mycotoxin here is much lower than what you can find as recommendation, both from EFSA, for example, or from the literature. So the mycotoxin can affect the liver in 2 main ways. One, it's more indirect, and we can see here that the blue bar represents the control diet that we have seen before, and the red bar is the diet with more mycotoxin inside. So what changed here in a significant way is the digestibility of the diet, both dry matter digestibility and fiber digestibility as NDF. This happens because mycotoxins are affecting the rumen fermentation processes by altering the microbiota, and therefore leading to less optimized digestibility, let's say. When this happens in early lactation, you can easily understand why this can exacerbate negative energy balance. So this is the first way that will induce to a more severe fat mobilization. The second way, it's more direct, and it involves actually a liver damage. So in this graph, we see 2 liver enzymes that can be dosed in the blood. These are aspartate aminotransferase and gamma glutamyl transferase. So basically, these 2 enzymes are used as indicators of liver damage. And what you see here is a significant change from the 2 diets. And what is important to understand is that this change happened only after 21 days of exposure. So it doesn't need to be a very long exposure to have a visible liver damage. But mycotoxin is not all. There is something else that can be very harmful for the liver. Right, Ignacio, I will hand you the lead now.
Sorry, Ignacio, just to point out, we can't hear you. Perhaps you're already muted. Can you check your settings?
Yes.
There you go, perfect.
Typical. Yes, Andrea, correct. We also, when we talk about the liver and some toxins that affect the liver, we must as well talk about the endotoxins. We cannot leave them aside. But let's go quickly through what are endotoxins. Well, they are gram-negative cell wall components. So they make part of the cell membrane that covers gram-negative cells specifically. And they are exposed only during either autolysis because of rapid cell growth, rapid growth bacteria phase, or another case which happens in dairy cows very often is when the rumen pH is low, and there is lysis of this bacteria, there is death, and when they die, this cell wall component is exposed. If you can observe in this chain, you can observe the polysaccharide, and then which includes O antigen, core oligosaccharide, and then the lipid A side is usually on the inner side of the cell. But when it gets exposed, when the cell dies, it gets exposed, and then this lipid A exerts an effect, a toxic effect in the cells. So the macrophages have receptors for this lipid A, and they therefore produce pro-inflammatory cytokines. And these pro-inflammatory cytokines, they go everywhere in the body because because these endotoxins are absorbed in the intestine and through the epithelium, and then they go through the rest of the, with the portal vein through the rest of the body. But how do endotoxins affect the liver? So when we talk about a healthy animal, an animal that is on homeostasis is an individual that has a balance between performance and immune system. So there is no reason for which the animal has to invest a lot of energy in immune system because it's in balance. But when there is a reflex or a stimulation of the immune system, like the pro-inflammatory cytokines, there is an excessive activation of the immune system that costs a lot of energy, and this activation of the immune system comes at the expense of performance. So the performance or the milk production are limited. But this is like the general effect. But if we look more specific, the pro-inflammatory cytokines, they actually induce specific liver inflammation. And when this inflammation occurs, there is also hepatocyte degeneration, which are the cells of the liver. They are degenerated and damaged. And additionally, because of the immune system activation, there is immune cells depletion from the liver. So the capacity to respond to other pathogens, which are going to be, let's say, a more risky pathogen to the cow, then it's not going to be as able to fight against. And as we said before, it's a high energy expense. So actually endotoxins influence many of the periparturient diseases that we know because of this depression of the immune system. There are more diseases that can easily come and cause more damage than what they usually do. For example, mastitis, laminitis, metritis, fatty liver is also induced, and then displaced abomasum and milk fever. So actually, most of the periparturient diseases are also sensitive to endotoxins influence. And in this graph, we can observe a little bit more clear for us to understand how can we influence the release of endotoxins. So if we look at this graph on the x-axis, we can look at the ruminal pH, and on the y-axis, we can look at endotoxin concentrations in the rumen. So the more towards low pHs we are, the more likely it is that we will reach high concentrations of endotoxins. So we can observe that the black squares are related to a 45% concentrate ratio in the diet, whereas concentrations of 0 to 15% of concentrates lead to lower concentration of endotoxins. And then lastly, these are some very recent results from about a couple of months ago that we did in collaboration with the University of Veterinary Medicine of Vienna. And we did a comparison between with 24 cows. We looked at the effects of high concentrate ratios in liver health of cows, and we divided them by primiparous and multiparous. And then we fed them 2 different diets. So for the 2 first weeks, the cows were consuming a 60% forage and 40% concentrate ratio. And for the next 4 weeks, then we did a transition towards 40% forage and 60% concentrate. So we went to high forage to low forage. And we can observe the response that this gave us in liver enzymes, which are markers for liver health or liver functionality. So we can see that in most of them, as we switched to higher concentrate diets, there was significant increases in liver markers for for damage of the liver. And what calls more the attention here is that the dark bars, which represent the primiparous cows, indicate that they were more sensitive to these treatments. And what this tells us is that primiparous cows, because they have not been before exposed to high concentrate diets, they're more sensitive, or their microbiome is less adapted to these diets, and therefore they decrease the pH sooner, and then the releases of endotoxins happen in a more aggressive way, and that is why they're more sensitive to liver damage due to high concentrate diets. And this is very important to take into consideration when you adapt the diet to specific groups of the cows. So now I give the word to Andrea.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Before we get to that, I wanted to jump in just one more time. Thank you for that information on endotoxins. Since we're on the topic of liver health, we want to check back with our audience and see what they're doing and what they recommend in their operations at this point. So let's launch our second and final poll question. And here it is right up on screen. Please go ahead and choose the one best answer that fits your situation. Do you currently use feed additives to support liver health, or do you recommend using them if you don't have your operation, if you're in a consulting function? The answer choices are no, I don't think it's necessary. No, but I think it could be beneficial. Yes, only in some particular cases, and yes, always. And then we're going to get back to our topic. We're going to share those results as soon as we see that everyone who wants to participate has been able to. So the answers are coming in right now, and as we've already seen, there are a couple of, let's say, big challenges that are definitely worth considering when it comes to mycotoxins and endotoxins that could jeopardize liver health, among other factors. So with more than 60% of the vote in, we're just going to give everyone another moment there. If you want to click and answer, please go ahead. We're going to close these results and put them up for the audience to see. Here's what you had to say. Only 4% said no, they don't see a need to use feed additives to support liver health. 25% said no, but it could be beneficial. 44% said yes, that they do use feed additives to support liver health, but only in some particular cases. And 26% said yes, they always use feed additives in order to support liver health. So, Andrea, let's go back to you. Again, how does this match with what you're seeing in the field? Does this match the recommendations that you would make to anyone who's looking to optimize liver function?
Okay, Ryan. So I think that these results show that liver health is perceived as something important.
Right.
There are additives that have a wide consensus. I would say if you think about protected choline or methionine, these are all additives that that are used successfully to basically to help the liver dealing with excessive fat, and also other function like methionine is doing a much more function than this. And also some vitamins, I would say, can come into help in this case. But here, I would say also I want to show how one of our additive, Microfix, can help in this sense by its beneficial effect against both mycotoxin and endotoxins. I will go to the next session then, which is our tip on how to use a good fuel filter. So we have previously referred to the liver as an engine. So, but we have seen that also together with the feed, or what we can call the fuel of our engine. So some toxic compounds can come along with it. So coming from external sources like mycotoxin, or internal like endotoxins. So for this reason, here it's our nice fuel filter placed in the rumen, which I will show you in a minute to understand how it can help. So first of all, as you might know already, Microfix, it helps in deactivating mycotoxins with 3 different strategies. So the 3 strategies are adsorption, biotransformation, which refers to enzymatic degradation of mycotoxins, and finally bioprotection by supporting liver and immune system with a blend of natural ingredients. This is translated into these results that can be achieved. So if you remember the study I was showing you before, where the 3 different diets were fed to the high producing animal and where digestibility was affected, well, you can see here that in the diet fed with Microfix, so digestibility could be restored to the normal level. And the same happened with the fiber digestibility, which was measured by analyzing fecal samples from the cows. You can see here that it can look strange, but this treatment group, the results were even better than the control group, simply because control group was not, let's call it, clean of mycotoxins. There was still a small contamination in it. At the liver level, again, we could see a beneficial effect. So those enzymes that were indicating a damage in the contaminated diet were, let's say, kept under control by Microfix in a way. So they didn't reach the level of the contaminated diet when the Microfix was fed. Additionally, I want to show you what Microfix can do against endotoxins. So we knew already from our in vitro study that Microfix has an affinity in binding endotoxins in vitro. So this is an experiment done with Rusitech technology, rumen simulation technique. And in here we have rumen fluid, which is cultured for 360 hours with a fairly low concentration of Microfix. So what we can see here, it's a very nice reduction of endotoxin concentration in rumen fluid. So after that, we decided to go in vivo to check what are the effects on animal in vivo. So we published a study in 2018 where we took fistulated cows. These are dry cows, important to mention, non-lactating cows, which were exposed to what is called a SARA challenge, subacute ruminal acidosis challenge, meaning that cows were initially fed only forage in the diet, and then in a time period of 1 week, the diet was highly concentrated and reached about 65% of concentrate. In this way, you increase a lot the carbohydrate in the ration and give a strong stress to the microbiota. Yeah, then, as you can see here, the cows were again put on a only forage diet, and afterwards they were given a second challenge, this time longer than the one before. The cows here were fed either no additive, or in this case Microfix plus 3.E, and then the pH was measured, and I will show you in the next slide what's the result at the liver level. So again, we have our liver enzymes measured on this animal, and what you can see here is that, especially when you are in the middle of the second challenge, which is longer than the first one, we can see those liver enzymes raising up in value very, very sharply. This could be also because of the first challenge, and let's say the effect on the liver are delayed in time. So we really don't know if this happens just on the longer challenge, or maybe it's just a delayed effect. But what is visible here is that when cows were fed Microfix, so these enzymes didn't rise up like in the control. So again, another indication for us of protective effect. The last study we did, which is actually in preparation by our R&D, was on lactating cows. So my colleague Ignacio, just a few minutes before, showed us that primiparous cows are more prone to suffer the effect of endotoxin release. And what you see here is an experiment where the two diets were offered. So again, 60% of forage and 40% of concentrate, and then it's vice versa, less forage and more concentrate. So in practical, this means going from a diet with less non-fiber carbohydrate, going to a diet with more carbohydrates. So what you see here again are in the top part of the screen, you have two liver enzymes again that at the moment you switch the diet, they tend to go up sharply on primiparous cows. And again, with Microfix, the impact is minimized, especially the effect is visible, especially in the first 2 weeks. Below, you see albumin, which is a negative acute phase protein, meaning that if you have inflammation here, the level, the concentration of this protein is going to go down. And what you see in the graph is that when where Microfix is fed, the protein level concentration is remaining higher than control. So again, another indication for us. So this was the mode of action of our product against these two different toxic compounds. Now I want to go more in the practice and to show you how Microfix can be used in a dairy operation. So let's say if a farm has a possibility to have groups, for sure the fresh and high lactating cows here are, let's say, the more exposed cows to a higher risk of liver being overwhelmed by endotoxins or mycotoxins. So I would say these two groups of cows, the high lactating until peak of lactation and the fresh cows, they would require a higher dosage. We are talking here of 30 grams per head per day, which we consider the higher dosage. Then in this later part of the lactation, Microfix can be scaled down to what we call it maintenance dosage. So we are talking about 20 to 15 grams per head per day. Not to forget this part here, the close-up diet. where actually you are starting on scaling up the carbohydrates, and also this is where all these inflammatory processes are starting. Of course, primiparous cows need the same attention for the reason we have just presented. Let's now go to our final take-home message. So we have seen that liver health is particularly challenged in early lactation due to negative energy balance, and that feed management is crucial to keep these cows with a good body condition score and a healthy liver. Moreover, mycotoxin and endotoxins can contribute to liver damage, and Microfix can offer a valid help to counteract these compounds. So also from the poll question, we have seen that it's not always easy to assess the mycotoxin risk level during the whole lactation. Therefore, we recommend to never remove the fuel filter if you want to keep your engine performing well. So it's the same reason you're not removing from your car, actually. And with that, I will thank you for your attention, and I will be pleased to answer any questions.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Ignacio, for your prepared remarks. We have plenty of questions coming in about the topic, so you've really generated some interest. I want to thank everyone who has submitted a question thus far. Please go ahead. If you have a question in your mind, go ahead and type it in. We'll try to get to it right now. Let's go ahead and get started. And I want to turn to Andrea because you showed several pieces of research that were demonstrating that liver enzymes that were indicators of liver damage, right? And these were scientific studies. Are those indicators of any use in the field? Is there any way to monitor those, or is that a bit too?
I would say nowadays, I would say the answer is probably not yet, but I'm pretty sure that also in our company we have some projects which let's say aim to detect some biomarkers and to be used also in the field. So this will be actually probably the future of dairy farming, of providing reliable biomarkers also to, let's say, to do what is called the precision feeding and to detect problem in advance and to detect problem cows in advance. So that's my feeling. We need to wait a bit to have something in the field available, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. So the technology is always advancing. It's very interesting to see what comes in the future. I'm sure we'll all look out for that. Look forward to hearing more about those efforts. We have another question here about, let's see, you've already given us the definition of mycotoxins, right? So mycotoxins grow, produced by fungi, either in the field or in storage on grains. Can Ignacio or Andrea, can you give us a split? Where would we typically expect to see more mycotoxins contamination in the diet, right? Should we be looking more at TMR? Should we be looking more at the forage? What are the, let's say, most likely suspects when we think that there might be a problem?
Yeah, Ryan, the best would be if you can sample the TMR, because that way you can get a bigger picture or a more complete picture of what the contamination profiles are. But sometimes this will depend also on the kind of analysis that you want to do. So if you're going to do ELISA, for example, you cannot analyze complex materials such as corn silage or a TMR. ELISA would only work for very simple, like for raw products, like if you look at corn, at soybean, or individual materials. And if you want to look at complex profiles like your corn silage, which is also something to look at because it's usually contaminated by many mycotoxins that come from the field, then you should use some HPLC or LCMSMS, which are a little bit yeah, techniques that are more expensive, but that give us more understanding of what mycotoxins are in the materials. And about when we talk about what to sample or what to analyze, we recommend to analyze actually all the possible ingredients, because we have references of highly contaminated silages, beet pulp, silage, also grass can be contaminated, and then also corn or many different grains. So actually anything can be contaminated with mycotoxins.
Thank you for that guidance, right? Things to keep in mind about how to approach testing, right? Because it's also something that needs to be cost effective, but it needs to work, right? It needs to be comprehensive in order for it to be meaningful for the operation. Let's turn a bit to forages, right? So these could be a very cost-effective source of feed material. And we have a practical question from Marcel. I have a forage now, and I know there's a high level of mycotoxins. Now, it doesn't specify which mycotoxins, but just a high mycotoxin load. I have no plan B to feed other forages. What do I do? All right, so can Marcel go ahead and feed these forages to the animal?
Okay, so that's I would say not a super nice situation, because normally what you tend to do is at least to reduce the amount of the contaminated material and substitute with something else. Maybe one can look into, let's say, alternative fiber sources. They can reduce a bit the forage amount and substitute with let's say, ingredient like sugar beet pulp or soybean hulls, something which is a nice fiber content. This is something you can do to decrease the amount of the forage, or there is no other choice other than to use a mycotoxic counteracting product. So you use the product, and in this way you minimize the impact of mycotoxins. So that's the only thing to do in this case, and probably try to avoid the mode, or at least to reduce the amount of the contaminated forage in the most sensitive groups, early lactating, close up, and also the dry cows.
Okay. Absolutely. Any thoughts, anything to add on that, Ignacio?
No, correct. Ideally, it is if the contamination is quite high, then the best thing you can do is to dilute. But as Andrea says, so the best thing is to dilute and also to add the Microfix. But when there is no possibility to dilute, then I would go for a higher dosage of the Microfix in order to minimize that risk, even to a higher extent. Yeah.
Oh, great. So some real practical advice, Marcel. We wish you the best of luck with that challenge. Let us know how that goes, right? If you follow Andrea and Ignacio's advice, and give us a follow-up on how you're doing there. We have some more questions about liver damage, and I believe you touched on it briefly in some of the results you were showing, Andrea, that even low levels of certain mycotoxins can cause liver damage with those indicators that we saw. Which mycotoxins in particular should we be looking out for? Which ones are the ones that are most known to cause liver damage?
Well, I would say there is probably, if you look in the literature for a connection, specific connection between a certain kind of mycotoxins and liver damage, you will find most of the results with aflatoxins, because these are known to give liver damage. But then if you browse more carefully, you will find out results pointing also to other kind of mycotoxin like zearalenone, or also emerging mycotoxins. So, and as we have seen in this study, we had just deoxynivalenol and fumonisin. So they do also give liver damage. So basically, I would say this is a wide effect given by all kinds of mycotoxins, or most of them.
I believe also it's a question of how direct or indirect these effects can be caused. So, for example, as Andrea said, the aflatoxins have a very direct effect, and even at super low concentrations, they can be highly toxic. But we also have effects that are more less direct, and for example, just by decreasing the digestibility and of the material that is fed, then we can lead to a deeper negative energy balance. So in the end, this all causes fat storage, or it only worsens the situation at the liver level.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've generated a lot of interest here in the topic of endotoxins. So although we could go much further into the mycotoxins topic, and we do have more questions there, I want to turn a minute and address the endotoxins. First, Ignacio, perhaps, or Andrea, feel free to jump in as well. Can you give us a sense of, we've seen these two challenges really. Which one is more serious? Which one should have people's attention the most, right? As how are endotoxins as serious as the mycotoxins challenge can be, or are they a secondary consideration? Well, how should people think about this?
I don't have an exact response towards, for example, which one leads to a much more toxic effect at the liver level, but they're both highly toxic, and it depends on the concentration. So the concentration that each can reach depends, for example, on the endotoxin side, on the pH level or the concentrate ratio that is in your diet. And in the mycotoxin side, it will depend on the concentrations that are the cows exposed to. But not only this, but also the combination of the mycotoxins that they have. And also, if there is some level of acidosis, then these mycotoxins are not being degraded in the rumen, so they come in a more pure way to the liver. So this really is a multifactorial influence of issues that determine how toxic one or the other can be. I cannot really tell which one is more, but both are, I think, highly compromising the health of the cow. And also, particularly if we look at the peri-parturition stage, it's both are of high risk.
Let's also say that the topic of endotoxins, or LPS, is gaining more and more importance. On one side, you may have a diet contaminated or not with mycotoxins. On the other hand, I think every cow undergoes to, let's say, an increased level of endotoxins when she approaches to parturition. So if you look from this perspective, probably endotoxins is a problem that all cows have, while mycotoxin not everyone has. So sometimes contamination can be very low and not really an issue.
Yeah. All right. So I think that helps clarify it. Thanks for putting that into context for us. So now that we've understood a little bit more about how often or how frequent these challenges could come up, let's shift to the solution, right? We've had a couple people say, they understand, they've seen how Microfix is clearly a solution designed and well known to tackle the mycotoxin challenge. How does it solve the endotoxin issue? What is going on there that Microfix is able to tackle endotoxins, and how does it do both, right? How can it tackle mycotoxins and endotoxins at the same time?
Okay, so as I tried to point out before, we have seen, let's say, at least in vitro, a clear binding effect on endotoxins. So these could be indirectly related to liver health for the mechanism described before. So in practice, you have LPS going to blood circulation and through the portal vein reaching the liver, and they are causing a damage. So this is the speculation of the literature describing the mechanism of action of LPS and how they do relate to liver health. So what we saw in this study is this protective effect on liver damage, which is occurring liver damage not only when you have mycotoxins, but even if the diet is clear from mycotoxin, it happens anyway because you just are increasing your concentrate in the diet. So, and we saw that Microfix can help even in this case where no mycotoxins are there. So that's why we are digging into this topic in the research to, you know, that could be a really another plus from Microfix to add to its usual mycotoxin counteraction effect.
Yeah, I would like to add. So how the product works is when it's focusing on the endotoxin side, there's two main ways. So the first is that when the Microfix is in solution in the rumen and there is shear off of negative gram-negative bacteria, the lipid A is in solution, and at the same time as the Microfix is in solution, then the lipid A is bound to our binder, to the absorption side of our product. And then if we put attention to Andrea, we also have the third effect of our Microfix, which is the bioprotection mix, and it also it contains a component that promotes liver health and reduces liver inflammation. So this promotes an adequate function of the liver to be able to also degrade better the toxins that manage to come into the blood. So the first thing is to avoid that the endotoxins come to the intestine and then that they are absorbed and that they come into the blood. And the second is that in case that there are some toxins around, we strengthen the health of the liver in order to make it more capable to overcome these threats.
Great. So thanks for clarifying that. We still have a few more questions on the how Microfix works, but we're running in towards the end of our allotted time today. So let's try to keep the answer short, a bit of a lightning round if we can. So Ignacio, for you, when we talk about Microfix that addresses endotoxins or Microfix that addresses mycotoxins, are we talking about different types of product, different formulations, or is this the same product?
So it is the same product. It comes all in one, and well, we have different versions of our product that adapts to different profiles of contaminations. But all of our products would solve the endotoxins problem. And however, on the mycotoxin side, we have products that are more suited to different threats. I don't know if that's what solves your question.
That's perfect. Thank you for that one. We have another question about Microfix, particularly because the absorption part. Is there any risk that Microfix binds to vitamins or anything else that would actually impair or decrease the nutritional value of a feed?
No, this we have proven against EFSA. We are the only binder that has the EFSA binder for aflatoxins that has the EFSA approval, and no other competitor has it, because we have proven that not only it binds to the very specific the mycotoxins, but also it does not reduce the nutritional value of the diet that you feed to your cows. So it's a very specific adsorbent. We're proud to have this EFSA approval.
Absolutely. Let's stick with regulatory frameworks here for a moment. When we're talking about the counteraction of endotoxins, are either of you aware of any special regulations or registrations required for the application of a product like Microfix to counteract endotoxins?
No. I don't
No,
think there is any. Yeah, there is
it
any
is.
free.
Yeah, it is also hard to quantify because it is not. It doesn't come from the feed, so you cannot analyze it. You can only get some ruminal samples to really know what's going on. So it's hard to have frameworks to regulate this. So the best we can do is to avoid these low pH conditions, and also to protect via Microfix, for example. But yeah, there are no specific regulations as far as my knowledge goes.
Great. That brings us to near the end of our time. I want to thank you both. We're going to close the Q&A there. Just to briefly recap, I want to take this imagery that you've introduced here during your prepared remarks. You said the liver is the engine, and that's how we should think about it. And that in order to maintain that engine, to make sure that there's nothing contaminating your fuel, you want to ensure that you use a good filter. Microfix is going to be able to do that. Microfix can do that in order to protect against mycotoxins and endotoxin challenges, if I've got that right.
You got it.
Okay.
Yes.
For all of you who have joined us, contribute your questions, we will be following up with you. We really appreciate your active engagement in this discussion. Thank you for your attention. We had a great session. Andrea, Ignacio, thank you both for joining us today and sharing your insights.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody, also to the participants.
And for our participants, I have just one final request. When we close the session, you'll see a short feedback survey pop up on your screen. Please take 2 minutes and answer just a handful of questions. Let us know what you thought about today. If you've got future topics or ideas on how we can improve as we continue this webinar series through the end of the year and even on into 2021. So we look forward to joining you again for the next session. On behalf of Biomed, I want to thank you all for joining and have a great day.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye, everybody.